Welcome to Belling History with the Good Time Girls, a hyper-local podcast about the quirky history of Bellingham, Washington, and the fourth corner of these United States. Even though we like to keep things close to home, these stories are no less entertaining to the masses and those who find themselves, unfortunately, outside of the PNW. We are your hosts. I am Ren.
And I'm Colby. And we are co-owners of Belling History Tours, also known as the Good Time Girls. If you want to know more about our tour business, visit our website at bellinghistory.com. And today's episode is called Globsters. What is it?
Globsters v. Bellinghamsters. Bellinghamsters v.
Globsters. Part 2.
Belling-Globsters. Part 2.
And that's Globsters.
It's Globsters.
Not lobsters.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, exactly.
Just to be clear.
We need to enunciate.
We're on to more Seamonsters.
Yes. Part 2 of Sea Monster lore here in the old Bellingham.
So, in our first part, we talked about sea monster, sea serpent sightings, indigenous legends, devilfish.
Devilfish, which are octopus, you need to know that. We talked about whales.
Imaginary whales.
Imaginary whales, real whales.
Okay.
And now we're on to even more stories. I cannot believe how many stories we found. I mean, it shouldn't be unbelievable, honestly.
Yeah.
But they're also entertaining.
Yes, they are.
We had to,
So, we are starting now in October of 1905 with another monster encounter. This is another devilfish, another octopus. So, the Herald headline read, "Escapes from huge octopus. Fisherman sees devilfish just in time. Monster of the deep reaches out tentacle in effort to ensnare man standing on rock at edge of the water." So this is William Brown, an old resident of this city and a noted angler, came very near being captured by a ferocious devilfish or octopus near the Great Northern Tunnel at Chuckanut yesterday. He was standing on a rock at the edge of the water fishing when he happened to look down into the water, a depth of about 3 feet, and saw a pair of devilfish eyes looking up at him. The octopus had a body about the size of an ordinary table and a hooked beak. He watched it intently for a while. Gradually, it reached out a big arm toward him, clamped it over a rock, and slyly began to draw a little nearer, evidently intending to get near enough to throw some of its tentacles around Mr. Brown. Mr. Brown perceived this move and lost no time in getting off the rock. He found a scantling about 16 feet long and lunged it down upon the devilfish and attempted to push it through its body, but found it was too tough. So we got a big stick, I'm guessing.
Okay.
He pinioned the ugly creature down for a while. Finally, the octopus darted away with startling rapidity. Go, octopus!
Yeah.
So it got away, thank goodness. But according to the story as told by the fishermen, the devilfish was one of the largest ever seen in Chuckanut or in Bellingham Bay. Mr. Brown has fished at that place for the past few years, but never had such a thrilling experience as encountered yesterday.
Damn.
And there was another article that was like he was going back because he wanted to try to find it.
Well, if he hadn't been a douche, maybe he would have come back and said hi to you. I feel like he just wanted to say hi. Maybe he wanted to eat him. He sounded kind of big.
I know, and they were like, he's reaching his tentacles out, trying to ensnare him.
All right. Well, while these marine creatures were being referenced as monsters by the newspaper for their large size, whales and devilfish are scientifically accepted critters. But you can see how use of these terms and the fear of this large, weird sea creature plants the idea in the mind.
Yes, they're portraying them very much as a monster of the deep.
Mm-hmm. And again, we're getting into this kind of clickbaity territory. All right. Another good sea serpent story arose in February of 1910 when the Herald reported, "Sea serpent's tail is afloat early in the season." I love that they've dedicated seasons to this. In our last episode, they did refer to like... Season. Yeah, and they referred to like, well, it's a little early for a sea serpent story this year, right?
It must correlate with the fishing.
It must, yeah.
The fishermen are out there
and the fishing.
finding the sea serpents, yeah.
You guys didn't know there was a sea serpent season. While the businessmen of Bellingham predict a great spring opening in all lines of business in the next month, the mariners and the citizens who travel by water are also seeing things. Jack Brown, a resident of Anacortes, swears by all the Roman gods that a sea serpent followed the launch Falcon into port yesterday afternoon. Brown says that he was sure he saw the serpent and that his pal Harry Johnson can vouch for the same. He told his tale on Seaholm Dock yesterday afternoon. According to Brown, the serpent resembled a huge porpoise with an extraordinary big mouth and had 3 long knife-like fins which cut the water with a swish as the big black monster followed the Falcon. Quote, "We first noticed the thing off Salish Island. It rose up out of the water like a whale and spouted furiously. If the Falcon had run under that spout of water when it descended, we sure would have been swamped. Nobody but Johnson and myself were in the cockpit of the Falcon, and we thought it about time to hike for the pilot house to keep from being swiped off the deck by the big brute. It had a huge head like a Mississippi River catfish, and a row of teeth like an alligator's. I tell you, this is straight facts, just as Johnson and myself saw the monster, and had not the Falcon been a swift boat, I believe she would have gone where the lost ships go. I could not say how long the thing was, for it was partly under the water, but it had scales as big as a pie tin's, and its eyes looked like 2 big poached eggs. Just as we passed Chuckanut Bay, the serpent stopped chasing us and suddenly dove out of sight. It appeared a minute later in the midst of a flock of brant, and I plainly saw several brant go down in its ivory-lined throat." Johnson and I did not say anything about the serpent to the crew of the boat, as we did not want to get bawled out, but nevertheless, it is as true as I stand here that the serpent will be heard from again in a day or 2, and don't you forget it. Spoiler alert, it wasn't heard from in a day or 2, as far as we could tell, but A for effort on the story.
Right?
Damn.
I like that ivory-lined throat.
Yeah, I like that
very
too.
Descriptive.
Yeah, and the poached eggs, and the pie tins for scales.
Good storytelling.
He's a big guy.
Good storytelling.
Yeah, I like it.
Okay, so a couple months later...
And now we're in season.
Yeah. May of 1910, a story is published titled Flock of Whales and Sea Serpent Seen by Fishermen. So a fishing party consisting of Larry Jerry, great
Larry
name.
Jerry.
His name was like Ilario or something like that. He was Italian.
Oh.
So, but I like Larry Jerry.
No, Larry Jerry's so much better.
Larry Jerry and Frank Stanley of the Puget Sound Bottling Works and a party of friends drove down the shore road at sunrise yesterday, well stocked with provisions, bait, and thirst-quenching beverages.
The stuff.
Easy because they work at the Bottling Works, which was over on 11th Street in Fairhaven. They bottled and delivered beer. Yeah, and these guys got in trouble a lot during Prohibition. And so we've got Frank Jerry Fields, which is a baseball. Softball fields are named after one of the sons of one of these brothers, because he was a real athlete guy. Anyway, so Larry Jerry, Uncle Larry.
Uncle Larry was out here with his thirst-quenching
beverages. That's right. And the Herald further says, although it is alleged that the liquid cargo of the expedition consisted of ginger pop and soda water, the fishing stories told this morning by one member of the party would tend to create the impression that the labels of the bottles belied their contents. An unusually large crop of whales are reported to have been sighted off the leeward of Chuckanut Point, and a sea serpent of great dimensions is reported to have passed the fishing party within hailing distance. Although it is claimed that there was but one serpent, several of the bunch are positive that there were several. A good string of pike were caught after an enviable day's fishing. One of the party fell overboard and caught cold, and the others caught something else when they got home last night.
Oh, Larry Jerry.
They had a good time, whatever was happening.
I know, one fell overboard. They're like, soda water. Oh, man. Oh, here we go. Speaking of Prohibition, let's get into the Roaring 20s, which is funny. Listeners at home, you don't know this, but I just got done giving a tour downtown, so I'm sitting here.
Brent's looking adorable.
Falling off of my face, but I am in a flapper dress, my ass hanging out. Sorry, Colby.
I should take a picture of it.
I know, we should put this on the Instagram.
We do need to.
Full costume, because that's what I give to this process, you guys. I am in full costume. You are welcome. I have to be in character in order to, like, properly convey. Okay, anyway, we're in Prohibition time. Let's get into the Roaring 20s. During the 1920s in the Pacific Northwest, Ogopogo was all the rage. Colby mentioned this guy last time.
This is the one from Canada.
We didn't get to him. But in Canadian folklore, the Ogopogo is a lake monster said to inhabit Okanagan Lake in British Columbia, Canada. That is a big, long lake way up there in BC, with the Okanagan River drains from, which flows through eastern Washington. So you started to get publicized sightings of some kind of sea monster in the lake in the 1920s. And the name supposedly came from Ogopogo, the Funny Foxtrot, a song that came out in the 1920s, which had the verse, oh boy, his mother was an earwig, his father was a whale, a little bit of head and hardly any tail, and Ogopogo was his name.
When I said to that quaint old chap, why do you carry that mixing of perhaps a butterfly net and rusty gum? He replied, listen here, my son, I'm looking for the Ogopogo, the funniest Ogopogo. His mother was a pollywog, his father was a whale. I'm going to put a little bit of salt on his tail. I want to find the Ogopogo while he's playing on his old banjo. I just want to take him back home where I'll take him, and then I will make him the sensation in a Broadway show.
I'll be dancing this shit.
The foxtrot into that one.
Okay, cool.
We'll post a link because you can listen to it.
Okay, so
That's
this was like a
Ogopogo.
widely released song, and then these people were like, oh, that's a funny song, and we need a funny name for this funny little creature.
Yeah, he's got a whale of a tail.
And he's got a whale of a tail. Oh my gosh, alright, well that was a lot. His mother
Or
was
hardly
an
any
earwig.
tail, sorry.
Yeah, no.
But his father was a
His
whale.
mother was an earwig and his father was a whale. So he had a little bitty head and a hardly any tail.
Okay.
Well, then he was just a little guy.
Okay.
But anyway, the Ogopogo was his name. Anyhow, the legend of Ogopogo is tied to indigenous lore, a water creature called Naitaka. In September of 1926, Adalbert F. Haynes, formerly of Bellingham, paddled for 5 days on Lake Okanagan in an attempt to photograph the creature. It doesn't seem to have been successful, as we've never seen any photos, but just days later there was another reported sighting. Then, just a few months later, in November of 1926, the Bellingham Herald reported that during an open-air baptismal service held on the shores of Okanagan Lake by the Brethren of the Gospel, Ogopogo, the famous sea serpent, made an appearance and put a sudden end to the immersion part of the service. More than 20 people saw the water snake, described as having a sheep's head, but with a fin on the back of the neck about 40 feet long.
Someone saw God that day, I guess.
Right?
I don't know.
Really, that would make me rethink my belief in the
Losing
Lord and the
my
Bible.
religion. I don't know what's happening there.
I would question everything.
Yes. So Ogopogo, he was the news darling of the 1920s, but was limited to the waters of Lake Okanagan. And like I said, still a big part of their tourist economy up there. You can go. They have shirts, and I think there's big
I love
statue of
kitschy
Ogopogo
tourist
and shit like that.
We need our own. We need to
Right.
come up with our own cryptid. Somebody on a tour actually recently asked me if we had a cryptid here in
well,
Bellingham.
we can get into it. We can make one
Yeah.
easily.
I think
the Wild
that's
Man of the Woods.
our duty. But yeah, he has to have a cool name.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Okay, so in the 1930s, we got Old Hyaschuckaluk, also known as Cadborosaurus or Caddy, also known as Amy. So the naming guts. I like Old Hyaschuckaluk,
I love that.
or Old High for short, but most people call them Caddy, but we'll hear all of these names, so just know. In the 1930s, many sea serpent sightings occurred in the vicinity of Victoria, BC, near Cadboro Bay, north of Victoria. So it had been seen there a lot, and so that's where the name Cadborosaurus came, which was them trying to, like, categorize the creature.
Oh, right.
Like a dinosaur.
Science.
Yes. And so Caddy for short. And then Old Hyaschuckaluk is actually from Chinook jargon, which is literally big water snake. So Hyas means large or great. Chuck is water. And Oluk is snake.
Oh,
Hayas Chuck Oluk.
cool.
So eventually the newspapers decided that they were going to rename this critter Amy because it's easier. But Amy didn't really stick. We'll come back to it.
Okay.
Anyway, Caddy comes into broad public attention in 1933. Do you know what happened that same year?
Nessie?
Nessie,
Yeah.
the famous Loch Ness
There we
monster.
go.
So that first Nessie sighting had happened in May of 1933, and it basically went viral, right? So,
Yeah.
so Archie Wills, then editor of the Victoria Daily Times, he may have seized on the chance here to get in on some of that hype with our own local Pacific Northwest lore.
Sure.
So suddenly you started seeing a lot of reports of sea serpents in the articles and all this. And Old High, or Caddy, or Amy, is described as having a face like a camel rather than a sheep.
A sheep? Well, they're similar.
Yeah. So in 1933, the Herald ran an article titled Old High's Chuckaluck, British Columbia's camel-faced sea serpent may be giant conger eel, Northwest scientists admit. They say, conger eels as long as 7 feet have often been caught in these waters and are reserved as trophies. The conger is a terrible-looking fellow with an undershot jaw and bulldog teeth, and his face might be taken to look like a sheep, but not a camel.
Girl.
So this divides British Columbia sea serpents into 2 classes scientifically. The Ogopogo ovis, or sheep-headed what's-it, and the Ogopogo camelus, or the camel-headed nightmare. I'm quoting.
Okay. Then suddenly the media decided the serpent should have a better name and decided on Amy. Okay, this is... because it was simpler and more euphonious, but also because the serpent had allegedly been seen, quote, preening herself in the sun and combing her scales, leading another guy to speculate Amy might be the wife of Ogopogo. Sure. Why not bring a weird human gender stereotype into this story?
Like, how to tell me you're not a freaking animal biology person? Because, like,
Yeah.
I mean, come on. Males of many species are really
The preeners.
The preeners
Yeah.
and the fancy
The pretty
pants
ones.
of the family.
I know.
So, I don't know what the hell these people
Just
are
gave
thinking.
yourself away. Patriarchy. You are a knuff, Amy. I like it, though. I kind of do like it. It's got these big, long, fun names, and it's like, nah, why don't we call it Amy? It's just easier to say. Okay, it was then declared that the camel-headed sea serpent of Point Cadboros started a controversy that raged today, and it won't be settled unless the monster lays an egg. Old High, or Caddy, or Amy, made an appearance closer to Bellingham in November of 1933 when a Seattle man hunting ducks on the Skagit Flats reported a sighting. Richard J. Feek of Seattle, a hunter and total abstainer, steps into the limelight to declare that British Columbia's huge sea serpent has invaded the Skagit Flats west of Conway. While duck hunting down there, he was aroused by a terrific splash in the water when all of a sudden this thing came to the surface and the ducks flew in all directions. I saw at least 20 yards of its body, and that measurement is not an exaggeration because I'm a hunter, not a fisherman. Since then, he adds, he hasn't seen a duck on the flats, and he says he doesn't blame those ducks.
Okay.
I love that. He's also an abstainer.
And he's like, I wasn't drinking and I'm a hunter. Okay, so in December of 1934, we got a skeleton that had been found up in BC, and everyone was like, it's a sea serpent. But after analysis, guess what? It was the remains of a basking shark.
Oh.
And the Herald printed a photo of the carcass, and it captioned it, Sea Serpent, Just Defunct Shark. So a few months later, in April of 1935, Old High was reported browsing in BC territory again. You can't keep a good sea serpent down, salmon fishermen of British Columbia said today when they heard Old Highest Chuckaluck Cadborosaurus. Going right back to that big long name.
Yeah, this is way more impressive.
Old Highest Chuckalus Cadborosaurus is back on the job, horrifying strangers. Scientists thought they had slain the sea serpent legend a couple months ago when the supposed carcass turned out to be the cadaver of a wax-nosed shark.
Gotcha.
Up until then, hundreds of persons had reported seeing sea serpents, but the scientists' report rather discouraged them. 3 fishermen today reported seeing the familiar camel-headed reptile with a perpetual sneer, long flippers, and a snake-like body. Jack Patterson said he fled when it undulated towards his boat while he was trolling in the channel near Nettle Island. So Nettle Island is way over on the outside of Vancouver Island, which is actually on a map almost due west of here. Huh. But those sea serpents, they're
hanging out. And they were still saying camel-headed. But I don't, they're like, but it was just this shark. But
it's a globster.
It's a globster.
We're going to get to that.
We got to get to this globster thing. The people are waiting. We got a local sighting again the same month, April 1935, when the Bellingham Herald reported Lauren Hauer of Blanchard reported that while visiting his crab nets in his gas boat last week, he sighted a sea serpent off the shore at Seawood near Chuckanut Drive, about 2 miles from Blanchard. Hauer said he could see about 7 feet of the serpent above the water. It had a mouth about 18 inches wide. He followed the strange fish for about a half an hour. And then a couple of years later, in April of 1936, the crew of a Canadian tug, Beatrice, had reportedly sighted a sea serpent near Lummi Island when en route from Bellingham to Vancouver with a raft of logs. The serpent was described in Canadian papers as 35 to 40 feet long, about 2 feet through the coiling body, dark gray or black in color, swimming at approximately 10 knots. Captain Howard Kaler, dispatcher of the Bellingham Tug and Barge Company, was quoted in the Herald, and it says he, quote, raised his eyebrows and said he wondered how his men had missed seeing the monstrosity. It sounds kind of fishy, he continued. I'm going to tell the men on our company's tugboats to keep a sharp lookout for the reptile. If it is sighted again, I'll man a whaler and go out after it. Alrighty.
The following month, Bellingham had its own carcass.
Right.
In May of 1936, the skeleton of a strange creature was reported found in the Nooksack River near Marietta. Herman Olson caught the skeleton in a fishing net, and he had it on exhibition at the Indian village near the Nooksack River Bridge. And with some neighbors, they were puzzling over how to classify it. Mm-hmm. It was described as about 3 feet in length with short flat ribs and fist-sized vertebrae, and the upper end was believed to resemble the neck of a horse, leading them to wonder if they had found the remains of a gigantic seahorse.
I like that.
So they just had a little chunk of something.
Horses, camels, sheep.
So the Bellingham Herald also featured an editorial comment, is Marietta also fishing for tourist business? I couldn't find any further updates or information about the fate of this carcass, so maybe it's in someone's attic somewhere.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I love the idea of a giant seahorse.
Seahorse.
But he was in the river.
Near the estuary.
The waters of Bellingham Bay appear to have remained relatively calm until... in September of 1951, fishermen claimed to see a big serpent off of Lummi Island. Somewhere around Lummi Island, there's a sea serpent. Lyle Doty and Wayne Deming saw it. Doty saw the whole creature, and Deming, attracted by shouts from Doty's boat, saw the huge body but missed the head. So, Lyle Doty was fishing in Inati Bay on the lee side, or the Bellingham side, of Lummi at the end of Hales Pass, where a rocky reef juts out. And he said suddenly, Mrs. Doty, whose name was Frances, cried, "What's that?" And then he saw a huge head coming over the reef with a round, smooth face and protruding eyes. He said the head went over the reef into the water, and after it slid the body, round about 1.5 feet and 2 feet in diameter, with markings on it like a snake. He said it was at least 40 feet long and moved very quickly, disappearing into the water. Doty was adamant that it was a serpent and not a fish. According to the article, Mrs. Doty and his daughter, Chandra, were screaming. Also aboard were the Demings, who also saw the creature, and they all shouted to boats nearby, but no one else had seen it. No further sightings were reported. What do we got? That was 1951.
Yeah, some of these people might still be alive, so if you're out there, or your relations.
Yeah, so if you've heard these tales from your grandpa.
Okay, so more than a decade later, a strange animal was reported cavorting around in Birch Bay. So in March of 1968, this one was reported by park ranger Bill McGee, and it was described as being perhaps 50 feet long, colored like a lingcod with brown and white spots, a diamond-shaped head, and a protuberance like a rooster's comb on its back. McGee said it had come within a few hundred feet of the shore and it was not a killer whale. The creature continued to put in an appearance for a few nights and was apparently noisy as well. The Herald reported, "The orange, brown, white-spotted, pointed-headed monster that appeared in Birch Bay is not only visible but audible too." Bill McGee said, "It was out there all night. We could hear it spouting." Some monster analyzers say it is a pike whale, usually found in the North Atlantic, but McGee disagrees. Doesn't look like a whale.
Those
Chatty, that McGee.
dumbass monster analyzers. Don't look like a whale to me.
A few days later, 12-year-old Don Larson. Don, if you're out there,
Hey,
give us a
Don.
shout.
Come on the
But I
pod.
love this because 12-year-old Don Larson writes a letter to the editor and he said, "I have read and studied about sea creatures. It is my opinion that this is not a sea serpent, but that it could be an oarfish. An oarfish is a large fish that lives in the ocean and sometimes it reaches a length of 30 feet or more. It swims like a snake and has a crest on the top of its head like a rooster."
Yes.
Enter the oarfish.
Enter scary oarfishes.
I know, and,
They're
like,
really scary looking.
Don Larson, I think, is onto this because oarfish are largely today thought to be what probably a lot of sea serpent sightings are
They're
all about.
huge. And I just tagged the Good Time Girls last week, and I think it was an NPR, and they'd found like a huge one.
Yes.
Oh my god!
And they have like a little
Mhm.
fin thing down the
Like a
back.
wobbly
Yeah,
fin.
yeah.
And they're fucking creepy looking.
Yes.
They can be. And if they were coming up for some reason, because
Right.
they're kind of deeper water.
They are deep water.
So the oarfish, or ribbon fish, a long eel-shaped fish that grows up to about 36 feet. The oarfish has a crest of bright red spines on its head and a spiny dorsal fin running down its entire back. So we're giving sea serpent looks here. So to be sure, there have been a few more recent sightings, but we've covered a good chunk of history. So we're going to turn our attention to various theories about the sea monsters.
Yeah, like what do you think? Are there sea monsters? And if so, what are they? Are they oarfish? Are they not? And why do people think they see sea monsters?
I mean, I think a lot of it is like the ocean is very mysterious and shit can come up from the deep. Like we said, different weather patterns and things like that could bring them around.
Yes.
And so
I think when you're a sailor or fisherman or anyone out there on a boat, your mind and your fears and your imagination can really contribute to
oh, for sure.
things that are going on.
But also, like, we don't know half the shit that's out there, so anything is a sea monster
Yes.
to me. Honestly, I mean, I don't even eat fucking shrimp. They're little alien bugs to me. Very weird
Yeah.
and mysterious, you know?
So that's kind of like one theory is that people's just see weird shit and then like your imagination might turn it
Yes.
into a little something more
A little
fantastical.
Scary. Yeah, it's got the head of a camel.
So here's what they say about that on the American Museum of Natural History.
Yeah.
They say many sea monsters include features from living animals. A large tentacle becomes part of a monstrous sea serpent or many-armed kraken. The eye sees a fragment and the mind fills in the rest. A blend of tall tales, mistaken identity, and resonant cultural symbols. Stories of sea monsters often reveal more about the minds of the imaginers than they do about the natural world.
It's nice. And I think that's why it's fun to do this podcast, because it is a reflection of that history, too, giving us more context for what these guys were going through. So essentially, could be misrepresented sightings or actual creatures or stuff seen in the ocean, like kelp or logs or flotsam.
Like the creepy sea tree
tree. Yeah, exactly. I would be scared as shit of that. And
floating on Lake Wacom and looking down and seeing like a tree down there that it just looked like a weird spiky arms that were going to grab us.
Also, just generally, creatures of the sea are freaky looking.
Yeah. Yes.
And then, and they get pretty large. And especially back in those days, there were probably some real big ones.
Yeah.
This
Giant
was
squid.
Unmolested, you know? And then the backs of whales in a pod may have been interpreted like the sea serpent, like going up and down the serpentine kind of movement.
Let's talk about carcasses, too.
Okay, yes.
Because we got to get to the globsters, because we've heard several stories about carcasses being washed up or put on display, and of creatures that at first thought maybe it's a sea monster or a sea serpent. And usually after examination, they have been found to be some kind of, quote, known creature.
Yeah.
So when some kind of large critter dies at sea and washes onto shore, it's going to be at least partly to mostly, decomposed.
Sure.
So generally it's just part of a carcass and it's hard to identify. And one of my favorite fun facts I found while researching for this podcast episode is that unidentified carcasses are called globsters.
That's why
Globsters.
we titled this episode the Globsters, because it's a fun word to say and it is funny.
It's like, wait, no, excuse me?
It's a glob and a lobster. We don't know what it is. It's a globster.
I think that's Bellingham's mascot for sure.
It kind of reminds me of, oh my
cryptid.
Gosh. What's
it could
his
be
name?
It needs a name. Something the Globster.
Yeah. Oh God. We're really going to have to workshop this.
Yes, we are.
Listeners, if you have any ideas, feel free. Comment on our Instagram. I love it. I love a globster.
Yeah. So whales, sharks, things that die at sea decompose in weird ways that cause them to look unlike themselves. Hence, people think maybe it's a sea monster.
Right.
But it's
just a glob of DNA, really.
I like lobster.
But so before we can actually name what it is, we call it a globster. And that is science, people. We didn't just make that shit up, though it sounds like we did.
I don't know if it's science or not. It's just something I found on Wikipedia.
Colby, don't tell the people that. If anybody out there has any stories, I would love to hear some modern day.
Yes.
There's gotta be. We've got a lot of fisher folk out here. Yeah, so historically there is also an idea that ship damage from tropical cyclones such as hurricanes or typhoons may also be another possible origin of sea monsters. So this line of thinking, I believe, is that maybe after a ship encounters bad weather, they're a better story might be that they encountered a giant sea monster, or that they didn't just totally fuck up there out at sea and their ship is totally messed up. So in that vein, they may be associated with major storm events like a tsunami. And could these sea monsters be a harbinger of doom, some people say. So some people think that the fact that some of these critters that usually are only found deep in the ocean, like giant oarfish or squid or what have you, are seen near the surface, and that indicates they are there for some reason. Like they could be sensing an impending earthquake or a tsunami or a storm, right? Just a change in weather. The Natural History Museum said about the oarfish, although deep sea-dwelling, plankton-eating oarfish have no interest in sinking ships or consuming sailors, they are considered by some to be reliable predictors of deep-sea earthquakes and tsunamis, stranding themselves in numbers before seismic events. That's scary. A senior curator of fish at the museum, Oliver Crimmen, weighed in and said, "It's a long, flat, ribbon-shaped animal, and if you have that kind of body shape, maybe it's going to be particularly affected by pressure waves. There's quite a lot of conjecture, but there may be something at the heart of it."
I like that there's a curator of fish at the museum.
Fuck yeah! I'd love to be a curator of fish.
And the man who has that job is Oliver Crimmen.
Senior fish curator! We love you, Oliver. Come on the pod.
Yes. Yeah, so that's really interesting. There's also a popular theory that sea monsters are weird dinosaur survivors.
Well, yeah.
Like we talked about with Nessie. And this is very popular with the cryptozoologists, aka the cryptid people.
Yeah, I love them.
So cryptids, just FYI, are animals that cryptozoologists believe may exist somewhere in the wild, but whose present existence is disputed or unsubstantiated by science. Therefore, a sea monster or sea serpent is a cryptid.
A cryptid.
But we're also talking about Bigfoot, Chupacabra, the Jersey Devil.
The jackalope?
The jackalope, sure. So cryptozoologists suggest that modern-day sea monsters are surviving specimens of giant marine reptiles, such as an ichthyosaur or a plesiosaur from the Jurassic and Cretaceous periods, or could be an extinct whale like a basilosaurus. Never even heard of that, but I like it.
I have. Oh my gosh. Arlo was so into the dinosaurs. Plesiosaurus, ichthyosaurus. Oh my gosh. Yeah, the basilosaurus. I believe that. Or left over.
Yeah.
Just didn't get bothered. They stayed at the bottom long enough.
Well, we've got alligators and crocodiles are essentially...
Yeah, get fucking chickens.
Birds.
T-Rex walking around.
Ostriches.
There's proof. Anyway, in 2010, cryptozoologists set up 24-hour video surveillance at Telegraph Bay near Victoria, BC to acquire empirical evidence of Cadborosaurus. He's back.
Oh, nice juggaluk.
Yeah, this guy, Bob Iverson, got hooked after he had a sighting of what he believed to be a sea monster. And there's a group called CaddyScan that apparently monitors the camera footage. Cool. Seems like we're looking for a needle in a haystack, reviewing all that camera footage of just the fucking open ocean.
Right, and it's just like the one little slice. Like, how much can it really catch? So
Anyway.
there is a video that...
There's a video!
This is in Alaska, but you should click it.
Last year, he shot this video of what looks like a sea monster.
Okay,
just keep watching.
long.
Watch.
I mean,
His
if
head's
there's
gonna come out.
a
His head's
row
gonna
of
pop
things,
out.
they're in a very
Check
straight
this out.
line. Oh, he spouted.
It's got humps that are... They're 20 to 30 feet long. They're long, skinny things.
Oh, that is no.
What the heck is that?
That was cool.
Are you convinced?
Oh.
I don't know. I wasn't convinced, but
You
I
weren't convinced.
I
You
am
weren't
a skeptic.
convincing to me.
No, I'm like, it's like
It was
seals.
It's probably just like it spouted.
I know. I think I'm just way too steeped in skepticism and
Yeah.
science and
You
bullshit. But I do love a story, and cryptozoology is considered a pseudoscience for sure.
Mm-hmm.
But it fashions itself a science. Like, there's still the goals and methods. That's all borrowing from science and seeking empirical evidence. And yeah, I'm just really interested in the whole, like, wanting to believe in fantastical creatures in our modern cultural situation, because what would it mean to get proof? Would it mean a financial gain for the people if they were to get proof? But it's still kind of a reduction of a thing for, like, study or consumption, rather than, say, like, inspiration or behavioral instruction. Going back to the indigenous of conception of...
It is interesting because I think there's two ways to look at that, right? Like, there is the scientific way of, honestly, to me, that's what I was thinking, is just, I think it's nice to not know something.
Yeah.
I think what makes life worth living is the mystery. of
Right,
things.
and I think that's why we love a sea serpent story,
Yeah.
because the ocean has a lot of mystery,
Yeah.
but I think that we have a need for stories. I love that historically it was useful for a seafarer to be able to tell a good story. You're out there on the sea, not a lot of entertainment. So regaling each other with your tales of adventure and whatever is definitely going to be a good skill to have. And I think Seamonsters just fit in so nicely with that.
They do.
I read the Storyteller's Creed is never let the truth get in the way of a good story.
Love that. Our boy Dirty Dan would totally 100% agree.
Yes. So, yeah. I don't think you have to pick, science or story. I think you can have both things. Both things can have a place in the world.
Yep. I think that's true for more than just sea serpent
Right?
stories. Indeed. Yeah, that's a good episode. I mean, we went outside the bounds of our, like, normal, here is our historian details and dates, to these unknown little guys, but still falls in our realm of storytelling and context through history, and I think it's fantastic. I love all of the new things we learned. Globsters.
And this was just the best stories. There were actually a lot of sea serpent
Many,
sightings that, wasn't just going to go through and be like, and then on this date, another one.
We
Just
try to
some of
curate
our
it.
favorites.
We are fish curators.
That's right. Globster
Lobster
curators.
curators here.
At the Good Time Girls Museum of Marine Life.
At your service. All right, well, let's wrap it up. I think we got some more maritime-themed episodes coming up for September.
Yes, we'll be getting into some shipwrecks.
Shipwrecks. That'll be an interesting one.
Yeah.
Yeah, we so appreciate all for supporting and coming out when you can. We like to thank you all for listening to this podcast, Belly History with the Good Time Girls. Do subscribe, review, please, our podcast on your favorite podcast platforms.
Well, hey there, mama, where'd you go? You gotta reap just what you sow. That's too bad, too bad. To that old time, the old man hicks without bad weather. Put on the side, they were sewn together. That's too bad. To listen to that old time music.
Hey, And we'd like to thank Devin Champlin and the late great Lucas Hicks for the use of the Gallus Brothers song, Too Bad West Coast Blues. Check out the Gallus Brothers on Bandcamp and Devin Champlin, also on Bandcamp and at Champlin Guitars in Bellingham.
Oh, Lou loves you red, Lou loves you blue. Most of the time, Lou just loves you blue. That's too bad. To listen to that old time music. I lost my hat, I lost my brim. I look like a crow's nest swinging on a limb. That's too bad. To listen to that old time music.
You know, if you would be so kind as to like us on all of the social medias, check out all of our tours and events, and read our show notes and our blog that is beautifully written by Miss Colby Labrie. All of that at bellinghistory.com.
Lost my hat, lost my brim, looking like a crow's nest swinging from a limb. That's too bad, too bad. Well, I got no bugging, I got no smokes. I look like Grandpap and all of his folks. That's too bad. To listen to that old time music.
Tune in next time for more Belling History.
Good night, Bellingham.
Thank you. Thanks.